So you dream of starting your own farm, but have you asked yourself these 13 questions? Release the Quacken! So the first question you need to be asking yourself is, why do you want to start a farm? You know, farm life, while it may seem awesome and beautiful when you watch a YouTube video or see pictures on Instagram, it can be really hard. And if you don't have a sense of why you want to farm, it's going to be hard to sustain yourself through those tough times. And furthermore, when you start to think about the types of things you want to do on your farm, having an answer to that why is really important too, because it's going to guide you. Do you want to earn a living and run a small business? Do you just want to produce healthy food for you and your family? Or are you just dreaming of a simpler, more idyllic life? All of those things are perfectly valid reasons to want to start a farm, but they're going to differ from person to person. Then you need to ask yourself, what do you like? What sort of animals are you interested in? What sort of plants do you find fascinating? Are there some things you prefer to eat versus others? Are you allergic to certain things like duck and goose eggs, like certain duck and goose farmers you may know? You know, I actually know a guy who's an asparagus farmer out in the Midwest, and he absolutely hates asparagus, and as a result of it, he kind of doesn't like farming. So like I said, farming can be difficult, and farming is a lot of hard work. If you don't like the things you're raising, it makes it an even more miserable experience. That's why I would say that for people who are terrified of geese, stay out of the goose game. Then the next thing you need to ask yourself is, what skills do you already bring to the table? You need to do a blunt and honest assessment of what you're good at and what you're weak at. Knowing where your skills lie will help you plan out what you should be doing with your farm. It'll also help you figure out the skills you need to develop, as well as the areas where you might need some help from some friends.
My buddy Alfred!
You know, if I look at myself personally with Goldshaw Farm here, I always knew that I had no agricultural experience or background. And so as I started this farm, I would be learning on the job.
We don't have a cow. We have a bull.
That right there is clearly a weakness and a liability. So as I was building the plans around our farm, I really decided to build around all of my strengths, and that's why you see our farm operate the way it does today. Now that's a rather unconventional model for having a farm, but that's okay. No two farms look the same.
We look a lot alike, but we are not alike.
But if you're willing to build around your skills, both the strengths and the weaknesses, you're just going to be that much more successful. But if you're thinking about starting a farm business, you also need to think about the broader environment you're in and to see if there's any unfilled niches that you could try to engage in. Like, does everybody in your local area sell backyard chicken eggs, but nobody around produces duck eggs? That could be a potential business niche for you, but only if there's a regular and willing customer base that's there who wants to buy your eggs. If you have a product that nobody wants, that is not in fact an unfilled niche. Another question you need to ask yourself is, are you willing to adapt? Are you willing to let that dream you started with shift and change and evolve? You know, when we started our farm, my plan absolutely was to actually fill an unfilled niche of having duck eggs that people could buy, because everybody was doing backyard chicken eggs, but nobody had duck eggs. But the problem was, nobody really wanted to buy my duck eggs because nobody really was interested in eating duck eggs. It was too strange and different for most people in my area. And so as a result of that, I had to adapt. And that's where you see our farm being very diversified, where we do tree crops and we have geese and we do cattle. For example, the geese were never ever part of our business plans, and now they're a very important part of our overall farm mix and business strategy. You know, the other question you need to be asking yourself is, how much time do you actually have? Are you trying to be successful and profitable in that first year? Is this a long-term approach? Are you somebody who's in their 70s and this is like kind of a final act in retirement? Or are you a teenager and you're just hoping to get started? All of those things matter too. And that's actually only one dimension of time that I mean. The other thing you need to think about is your day-to-day life. What sort of time exists for farming in that day-to-day life? Are you gonna quit your full-time job and just focus on your farm? And so that means it wouldn't be unreasonable to be spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week just working on your farm? Or in order to make all the finances work, do you still have to have a day job? And that only means you can work in the margins and you only have maybe about 15 to 20 hours a week to contribute to the farm. Both of those dimensions of time matter. If you're 18 and you're just starting out, you probably don't have a lot of cash, so buying a chunk of land doesn't make sense, but traveling around and learning from other farms might be the perfect strategy for you. Or if you're 75, maybe trying to start a whole bunch of chestnut trees is not the ideal way to support your farm specifically, but it could be a way to support future generations of your family and generations to come. You know, if time is one resource that you have to work with, the other resource you have is capital. How much capital do you have on hand to invest in your farm. There's all sorts of types of capital. Financial capital, like how much money do you have on hand? Social capital, in terms of what sort of relationships do you have that you can leverage? State capitals, like Montpelier here in Vermont, where we're actually the smallest state capital in the United States and the only state capital in the United States not to have a McDonald's. And while there's many different types of capital for your farm, you really do need to be thinking about cash flow, which is just hard-earned money. What does your cash flow look like? How are you gonna pay your bills? How are you gonna put food on the table? Did you have to take a loan out to buy a whole bunch of land? Is it gonna be like our cattle and it's gonna take you more than a year to see financial return to the money that you invested in them? Or is it gonna be like our permaculture orchard, where it's gonna probably take me a good 15 years before I actually recoup all the money and time I've invested in that operation? If you don't have a sense of your cash flow picture, your farm is gonna turn into a disaster really quickly. You know, I was really fortunate that when I started the farm, I actually had a day job.
Working 9 to 5.
And that was really what was keeping us afloat from a cash flow perspective. As the farm grew and as things like social media cash flow started to come into the picture, I was able to balance things out. And so even though I don't have a quick cash flow for things like the trees or the cattle just yet, we have other revenue sources that are putting money in our pocket and that are helping us keep the farm going as we are operating today. The combination of those two factors right there is how we're able to operate our farm without being in any debt whatsoever. You also need to be asking yourself about what other responsibilities you have. And can you make those responsibilities fit in with your life on the farm? Does your spouse have a job in the city that prevents you from actually living out in a rural area where you can do the type of farming that you want to do? Do you have kids that you need to put through college? Are you the caretaker for an older parent or a disabled sibling? All of those responsibilities are going to be things you need to balance as you think about your vision for what your farm ultimately becomes. I do think that there is a risk for people who have a dream of starting a farm. It can be something where they're so focused on what they want to do, they forget about the responsibilities that they have, and then eventually those two things go head to head and it just creates problems, heartache, and strife. You also need to ask yourself, do you like physical labor? Because the fact of the matter is, regardless of the type of farming that you do, there's generally speaking a fair amount of physical labor involved. And it means being outside, it means being in the elements. And if you don't like those things, you might not like farming actually. You know, I'll admit, the first year that I moved up here and we had our farm, you know, one of the things I was really struggling with was just how much hard work and physical labor is involved with farming. As I was out there mulching all of our trees and burning myself out, I was exhausted just because I'd spent 20 years working in an office and hadn't had to physically labor like that since I was a teenager. And even when I was a teenager, I don't think I was quite physically laboring like that.
Woo! Y'all gonna make me lose my mind.
You also need to be willing to ask yourself, do you like being outside? Because for us here on our farm, being outside is a big part of what we do. And it doesn't matter if it's 35 degrees Fahrenheit and raining, or it's negative 25 degrees in a frozen tundra, or 100 degrees and I'm just absolutely sweating like a, well, not a pig because pigs don't sweat, but sweating like a disgusting human being. Another question you should be asking yourself is, do you like the mundane and the monotonous? Because when it comes to farming, the mundane and monotonous is the name of the game. And I don't mean that like in a derogatory way. I just mean that facts are the facts. That's kind of what it is. Doing the same animal chores over and over and over and over again, the same way every single day, twice a day for the entire rest of your life can be a little mundane and monotonous. And so if you're the type of person who really can't handle that type of thing, you should really question whether or not the farm is going to work for you. It's not to say that it's not going to work for you. It's just something you need to think about. Oh, Ginny, you just scratched my back. Like I was saying, if it's something that you're not inclined towards, maybe you need to have coping mechanisms and strategies. I'll throw on some headphones and I'll listen to a book on tape. I have never been so well read in my entire life since I started farming, even though it's rather rare for me to crack a book these days.
Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow.
Speaking of the mundane and monotonous, I gotta scoop up some of Abby's poop here out of her kennel. And then the final question you need to ask yourself, which might be the most important question on this entire list, is, are you able to learn from your mistakes? It has been my personal experience that when it comes to being a farmer, you will screw things up. And you will find yourself having to learn from some of the things that you screw up. But I find that a lot of the beauty of farming comes in that learning process. And that personal growth and that evolution has been the most rewarding part about starting this farm. And so if you're the type of person who can make a mistake and not let that mistake bog you down, farming just might be for you.
I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never gonna keep me down.
So these are the 13 questions I think any person who wants to start a farm should be asking themselves. Be sure to screenshot them, and then maybe if you like write down your answers, you can share it with me, or maybe you post them online to share them with other people. But if you want to start a farm, you should be asking yourself these questions. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you want to see some of my hard lessons learned, check out that playlist right there, and I will see you in those next videos. Thanks for watching, everybody.